In this video, I'm going to talk about the stigma behind pre-painted miniatures, some of the problems, and how they're not all that bad. I'm sure you've seen pre-painted miniatures before at your local game store. These days, they're predominantly HeroClix, little kind of superhero pre-painted, sort of rubbery looking guys, and they have a little clicky base that keeps track of wounds and things like that. And they generally come packaged in a box, and you don't know how you know how many, but you don't know what is inside. Or they come in these kind of bigger cardboard boxes called gravity feeds, and it's just a little pouch, which usually has one, maybe two, I don't know, in each pouch, and you open it up, and then there you go. But you're generally surprised by what you get. And if you've been looking at some of these models, the surprise is sometimes a bit scary. Even today, with the technologies that we have, HeroClix are not great paint jobs. As far as I can tell, it all started with Mage Knight, also a WizKids property. That was the first pre-painted miniatures game that I can remember. Again, it was random pack, you didn't know what you were going to get, and it was all fantasy creatures and orcs and dwarves and golems and stuff like that, and they were even worse than today's kind of HeroClixy pre-paint. They were painted in only the loosest sense of the term. I mean, it was not good. I just threw out actually some recently. I was digging around cleaning the basement and found some, and I was like, I can't even do anything with these. Partially because I thought, well, okay, I could just prime some of them and repaint them maybe and use them for something. I don't know. But because of the soft kind of rubbery material that they're generally made out of, any kind of swords, are just all bent, and the guns and things like that, they're all generally droopy, and just it's not great. And plenty of companies have tried to do good pre-paints, and for the most part, they've all failed. Let's see here. Rackham, which is a French company, they did two games, AT-43, which was a sci-fi thing, and Confrontation. And both of those had pretty decent-looking models, and you knew what you were going to get. They weren't a random pre-pack. There was like a little plastic window on the front of the box, and you were buying a squad of these guys, and they were not random pack. And they were generally pretty good-looking, but the problem is that production is very difficult to keep high in those situations. Case in point, one of the best pre-paints out there right now is a game that you may have heard of. It's called Star Wars X-Wing, and it's kind of taking wargaming by storm. The paints in that system are really actually quite nice, but now let's be perfectly honest, it's far easier to paint ships generally than it is to paint people. And they've done it very well with all kinds of little decals that I think get just sort of almost printed on there. Maybe they're ink jetted. I'm not exactly sure. Some sort of transfer print. And, you see different things on the ship. They do weathering. You've got washes. There's all kinds of things involved, and those ships do generally look really good. The thing is that it's difficult to keep that up. If you've been playing since the beginning with X-Wing, early on, ships would sell out because the game was getting more and more popular. And it's not as easy for companies like Fantasy Flight to be able to crank out tons and tons of these types of ships. It's not as easy to do that as it is to do the unpainted stuff, where you just basically kind of set the injection molding machine and it stamps out a whole bunch of sprues. You put them in boxes and shrink wrap them and send them on their way. There's a lot more steps that are involved when you want to do this sort of kind of pre-paint and when you want to do it well. This kind of answers the question that I get very frequently from people in comments and all kinds of different places saying, well, why doesn't Games Workshop just go to pre-painted models? I think Games Workshop's going to go to pre-painted models soon. The answer is that A, they're not going to go to pre-painted models, and B, the reason they're not going to is because they're a hobby company. They sell paints, they sell glues, they sell the little gritty stuff that you put on the bases and all that stuff, the little knives and everything. That's a big portion. The hobby is a big portion of Games Workshop's business, which is why they're not going to be doing those kinds of pre-paints anytime soon. However, not all pre-paints are bad. I mentioned X-Wing. They are really good. On the other side of the coin, another game based off of the exact same engine, which was Star Trek Attack Wing, those pre-paints are, again, really not good. So, you can do ships poorly, as our friends over at WizKids have told us, shown us in that situation, but not everybody does them bad. The game's Wings of Glory, which used to be called Wings of War back in the day, those were, again, some very early pre-paints, but they're pre-paints of World War I and World War II fighter planes. And I think those pre-paints look amazing. I love those. I've got probably more than half a dozen different airplanes, and they look great. It's a much different look because it's a lot cleaner. There's no weathering and stuff like that, like you see on the back of a Millennium Falcon or whatever. But they're great looking little models, and they really help to enhance the game. You open up that package, you put the little guy on the stand, the little airplane, and you go to town, and you have a good time. There are also games out there like Dust. There was Dust Tactics, Dust Warfare. Dust has kind of changed hands a couple of times. It's gone from Fantasy Flight to Battlefront to, I think now, just to the owner of Dust. They're their own company. They didn't exactly do pre-paints. What they did is they sort of pre-primed the models. You could buy them pre-painted, but they were considerably more money. The trick is that you could get these models pre-primed. The bad guys, the Axis, all their stuff was gray. The good guys, the Allies, the US, was pretty much all green. And then the kind of Sino-Russian kind of faction was all kind of red. And they had decals, again, printed on there, but there wasn't any other detail printed on or painted on it anyway. And so you kind of had to do it yourself. And it worked out really well, just going straight over the gray. I've done a little bit of it myself with some of the vehicles, and I think they turn out great. But the trick is that I don't really see it happening on a large scale. You see it with, X-Wing, and you see it with some other games like, Wings of Glory, which is not a large scale. It's not as popular as X-Wing and a lot of other games. But the fact of the matter is that why, if we're hobbyists and this is our thing, why are we doing this? Why are we looking for this kind of holy grail of pre-painted minis? I think the answer is actually pretty simple. It's because a lot of people find painting to be a chore. I talked about that in a relatively recent video that you can see up here. Pachow. People don't necessarily all put as much value into the hobby side of it as some people. I love the hobby portion. I am not particularly super into the games. It's not that I don't enjoy them. I'm just not super competitive. I'm not trying to constantly, make my gaming better and make myself more strategically sound in my plans and all that. I really want to make my paint jobs look a lot nicer, and I want to be able to play games in between painting. That's me. But there's a lot of people out there who just want to play the game, and when they do, they look at these sprues of, uncut and unpainted plastic as a big barrier. Understanding that, a lot of companies have tried in the past, and many have failed, to do the pre-painted miniature thing. HeroClix has actually failed because that company, WizKids, has crashed and burned once, and then technically WizKids was bought by another company called NECA, which now has brought it back. So it's kind of like the Hostess Twinkies thing that we had, where Hostess went out of business and everyone was like, oh no, and then they came back. It's the same type of deal. And the reason for that is because it's a very difficult manufacturing issue. Trying to pre-paint little three-dimensional people is a very difficult thing to pull off at scale and to make it work. We're not going to see, I don't think, a really popular line anytime soon beyond, X-Wing spaceships. I'm talking about a line of little figures, people, soldiers, wizards, elves. We're not going to see anything like that that's going to be a really good paint job, that's going to be very popular and reasonably priced anytime soon. You're going to see a lot of rubbery bendy sword guys, Pathfinder, D&D, companies like that. They're putting that stuff out there. But I think that what you're seeing is now the answer is more not so much I'm going to make these models pre-painted as it is I'm going to make these models easier to paint. WizKids has done something recently where they've produced a line of models kind of like the Reaper Bones, except unlike the Reaper Bones, these already are pre-primed. So they're very easy to basically get painted. They're already built, and everything's ready to go. You just need to start laying color directly onto them. They've got a line that's designed for Dungeons & Dragons that's licensed. They've got another licensed line for Pathfinder. And you're going to start seeing probably more of that type of thing happening down the road. They're also going to be doing it for Star Trek. So you're going to have unpainted Star Trek ships where you'll be able to paint them yourself, and make them look nice and better than the attack wing ones. So as new technologies emerge, 3D printing, all kinds of things like that, and the special things that are kind of needed to help color these things, to help paint them, I think that we're going to see things that are going to help you along the way, like the WizKids stuff, like Dust, things like that, and get you into the game a little bit more quickly. Even Games Workshop is starting to produce certain models in colored plastic, so you can just basically, take them out of the package, clip them, glue them, and at least they're blue. You don't have gray guys versus gray guys. Now you've got blue guys versus red guys. You get at least that benefit. So, the pre-paints can be sort of fun. If you need a whole bunch of skeletons for your campaign in Dungeons & Dragons, you can get a bunch of the pre-painted ones. You can find a lot of them on eBay, actually. And if you need a whole bunch of stormtroopers, you can find those types of things on eBay as well. There was a pretty interesting Star Wars minis game back about, 10 years ago, that the paint jobs didn't stink, but they weren't great. If you need that kind of stuff, it's great. But if you really want a good-looking paint job, it's probably never going to be a pre-paint.